Ritual crime is a complex and varied type of crime. Ritual crime is an umbrella term and can include anything from trespassing and graffiti to kidnapping, ritual abuse and ritual murder. It is most precisely defined as any act of violence characterised by a series of repeated physical, sexual and or psychological actions and assaults, combined with the use of symbols and ceremonies. Ritual abuse was formerly known as ritual satanic abuse, but the term was soon secularised. The term satanic was dropped and changed to a term that didn't have connotations with religion. Ritual crime can be associated with practitioners of occult ideologies such as Satanism or voodoo, but it can also be attributed to serial killers and sexual sadists who ritually murder their victims. The need to repeat such acts can be cultural, economic, psychological or spiritual. Illegal ritual activities are referred to as occult crimes in the eyes of the law, although the individual committing the crime doesn't necessarily have to be following a cult or religion, but it can be something that has been manifested from their own beliefs and ideologies. Ritual abuse and crime is fantasy-driven and often complex and varied. Freud believes that ritual abuse is often used to manage anxiety. It is a way of deflecting negative emotions and can be a form of catharsis in an otherwise repressed society. In this video, I'll be exploring two serial killers, Bruce McArthur and Ted Bundy, both who committed ritualistic crimes against a certain demographic of individuals. Bruce McArthur, born in 1951, is a Canadian man who lived in Ontario. He married a woman in the 80s despite knowing he was gay from a young age. McArthur was a landscape gardener and was reported to love plants and dote on his grandchildren. Eventually, he came out when he was in his 40s and moved to Toronto, where he lived in the gay capital. He could often be found in the gay bar Zippers, which was also visited by many of his alleged victims. Few people knew of his dark side. His first known attack was reported in 2003, where he assaulted a male prostitute with a metal pipe. He was given a 2-year conditional where he was told to stay away from male prostitutes and to refrain from a drug known as poppers. Police soon discovered the remains of several bodies and plant pots in his place of work, while other body parts were found in a ravine nearby. McArthur preyed on individuals whose disappearance attracted little attention. This included a prostitute, a homeless man, and a crack cocaine user. McArthur and many of his alleged victims were active on online dating sites such as manjarin.com and silverdaddies.com. McArthur's aim was to meet submissive men. Most of the murders were described in court to be sexual in nature, and there were many instances where staging as well as evidence of ligatures being used. Between the years of 2010 and 2017, McArthur murdered 8 gay men, many of whom were immigrants and refugees from South Asia, the Middle East, Turkey, Sri Lanka and Iran.
He didn't strike me as someone who was going to kill me. He struck me as someone who was trying to push my limits, but then it quickly turned to, this guy's not respecting my limits.
The first of the victims was 40-year-old Skandaraj. He disappeared in 2010. According to court documents, police seized a piece of leather lacing which contained his DNA. After killing him, McArthur kept his bracelet. The second of his victims was 42-year-old Mr. Fazzi. Mr. Fazzi's abandoned vehicle was found near a home that McArthur had access to at the time of the killing. McArthur's third victim was Mr. Kayan, 58, who was killed in 2012. This murder was reportedly sexual in nature. McArthur then staged the victim after killing him. He staged some of his victims wearing fur coats with unlit cigars hanging from their mouths with their eyes taped open. The next 5 killings were similar in nature. Sarush, 50, Karishna, 37, Dean, 47, Salim, 44 and Andrew Kingsman, 49. These killings were the definition of ritualistic. McArthur intended to cause all of these deaths. During each of these murders, there were certain factors present: planning and deliberation, a murder committed in the cause of sexually assaulting the victims, or murder committed while the victims were unlawfully confined. McArthur killed 8 gay men collectively. The court heard that he dismembered his victims' bodies at home on Mallory Crescent in Toronto's Leaside neighbourhood, where he kept his gardening materials in an effort to avoid detection. Not only that, but police found a bag with duct tape, surgical gloves, rope, zip ties, bungee cord and syringes, as well as DNA belonging to multiple victims inside of his van. The ritualistic acts stem from the offender's fantasies, which are somewhat distinctive for each individual. It is suggested that fantasy-driven rituals are as unique as an individual signature. Hazelwood and Warren found that the signature aspect of the crime does not change. It is designed to meet the offender's fantasy and therefore remains sexually arousing to them over time. Ritualistic behaviour serves such strong emotional needs for the offender that it may increase his chances of being apprehended. McArthur was probably in a perpetual search for the next kill that would top the last one. Serial killers become overwhelmed by the fantasy, constantly studying the craft of killing, the details of the murder and the memory of his actions afterwards. He would get a very small rush every time he revisited the remains of the people he had killed. Killing requires practice. The next ritual killer I'll be focused on is infamous Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy, born in 1946, was an American serial killer, kidnapper, rapist, burglar and necrophile who murdered and assaulted over 30 young girls and women in the 70s across 7 states in the US. Many of Bundy's victims regarded him as handsome and charismatic, which he played on in order to exploit their trust. There is no consensus as to when Bundy first started killing women. He attempted his first kidnapping in 1969 in Ocean City, New Jersey, but did not kill anyone until sometime in 1971 in Seattle, when he was 27 years old. Throughout the time he was killing, police received many tips that they dismissed, thinking it unlikely that a clean-cut law student with no adult criminal record could be the perpetrator. He didn't fit the profile. Bundy would lure women in by approaching them while wearing a cast or appearing otherwise disabled and asking them to help him put something in his car. He would then bludgeon them unconscious before binding, raping and killing them, dumping their bodies in a remote location in the woods. Many of the women's remains still have not been found, despite Bundy confessing.
I was moving up the alley using a briefcase and some crutches, and a young woman walked down. I saw her round the north end of the block into the alley and stop for a moment and then keep on walking down the alley toward me. And about halfway down the block, I encountered her and asked her to help me carry the briefcase, which she did, and we walked back up the alley.
After murdering his victims either by asphyxiation or bludgeoning, Bundy would often spend the night with the body. He would revisit these sites to have sex with the corpses until they were too decomposed or had been eaten by animals. He would sometimes remove their heads with a hacksaw and take them to his apartment, where he would wash their hair, apply makeup and engage in sexual acts. He would then take a trophy from his victims, such as jewellery or clothing, and re-gift them to his next victim. At times, Bundy would stage the bodies in provocative poses and take Polaroid pictures. He stated how he saw murder as a sport and how he would engage in a catch-and-release type of training during his off-season, when he would simply pick up women to keep his skills sharp and let them go. He remained uncaught for a number of years due to his constant moving across the states. Bundy ritually killed each of these women, carefully calculating how he was going to do it in order to get the most satisfaction possible. Bundy said that during these encounters some malignant part of his personality took over. He called it the entity, and it was looking for satisfaction. It was not an altered personality, but more like a disordered part of himself, a malignancy. Under its influence, he was aware of what he was doing. Bundy would say that a point would be reached where there was a reservoir of tension building and building. Finally, the entity would break through. He would say the tension would be too great and the demands and expectations of this entity would reach a point where they just could not be controlled. This enhances Freud's idea that serial killing is a form of catharsis and a release of some kind. MacArthur and Bundy both had a modus operandi, a particular way of committing their murders. They repeated their behaviours and rarely differed from their style when murdering their victims. Neither of the killers were committing crimes under the oath of a religion or magical elements. Instead, they were ritually killing in order to fulfil their own sexual fantasies and desires. MacArthur and Bundy shared many similarities when it came to their murders and their victims. For starters, neither of them were suspects due to their looks. MacArthur was friendly-looking, with big round features that resembled Santa, and Bundy was good-looking and well-groomed. Both killers staged their victims, kept mementos, and dismembered the bodies. Both killers also revisited the sites where the victims were murdered in order to keep the thrill alive. Both of these examples of ritual crime are particularly heinous in nature and are extreme examples of what can happen to a repressed individual within a repressed society. Durkheim argued that crime is an inevitable and normal aspect of social life. This is because not every member of society can be committed to the collective sentiments. He also states that crime is not only inevitable, but it is functional. Durkheim believed that any form of social change begins with some form of deviance. Criminal activity is only dysfunctional when its rate is unusually high or low. If there is little collective sentiment, then there will be too much crime and deviance, which will lead to the rise in individuality, and therefore the status quo will break down. This is what Durkheim referred to as the anomie, the loss of shared norms and values. In conclusion, ritual killing doesn't have to be satanic or related to magic. It can be related to petty crimes such as graffiti and trespassing, or it could be a more serious crime that involves killing. It is important to remember that people see ritual crime as a form of catharsis. It is an outlet from a repressed individual. Although ritual crime is unlawful and in some ways a form of evil, when crimes of this nature are committed, it brings communities together and reinforces laws, norms and values.